much. Good morning. I started my career about 15 years ago as a software engineer and eventually got into startups. I work with software engineers every single day, and we build products for developers. That's become my passion. So you are my people. I'm really, really excited to be speaking here. What I'm going to talk about today is a little bit different. This is more of sort of like a product and business challenge that I've seen many companies go through throughout the years. And I actually started a company to try to fix this. So we'll talk about that at the very end. But I'm going to talk about this problem as it exists in the market and hopefully give you some tactical advice you can take back if your company is anticipating experiencing this, or maybe you're in it right now. So this is crossing the enterprise chasm. So to get started, quick show of hands, how many of you are building a SaaS product, some kind of cloud-based SaaS tool? Great, a ton of you, most of you. How many of you are growing that through like a freemium-driven growth plan, a bottom-up, self-serve, people can sign up and use it, get started? Keep your hands up if you feel like you have product market fit. Some users, great, bunch of you. And then how many of you have not quite yet sold an enterprise deal? You haven't gone after enterprise, or maybe you're starting to go after enterprise and scale. This talk is specifically for you all. So there's 4 parts of it. First, I'm going to talk about what is the enterprise chasm. What am I talking about here? Then I'll try to make a case as to why you should cross it. Third, I'll talk about what makes this actually challenging, what makes this difficult to do. And last, I'll give you those tips on how you can actually get started and some projects you can start working on today. Okay, let's get started. So what is the enterprise chasm? The enterprise chasm is a transition that companies go through when they're moving from early adopter growth to really like larger commercial adoption and mainstream. So imagine yourself in this position where you've got that early adopter growth. You have some growth. People are using your product, signing up, sharing it. Maybe you have some word of mouth growth or some virality. You feel like you have that early product market fit. Users love your product. And best of all, you might even have some people paying for it. So you have some early customers and some commercial adoption. All of these companies went through those same stages, whether it's Dropbox, Slack, GitHub, Twilio, Datadog, or even something like ChatGPT. They've all gone through that phase of that early adopter growth and eventually built great businesses, right? This is really the enterprise software success formula. So these are a few bullet points taken from a presentation by Mary Meeker in 2018 about how these companies go at market and grow. First, you build that amazing consumer-grade product, so for the enterprise, a great quality experience. Second, you leverage virality across those individual users to grow personal and professional adoption at low cost, so it's cheap to acquire those users. Third, you harvest those individual users for enterprise go-to-market with your dedicated inside sales team or marketing team. Build the enterprise-grade platform and ecosystem, fourth. And then fifth, this allows you to have a lower cost, product-driven customer acquisition and a sticky business model, essentially the promised land. You can have really, really great customers that pay a lot of money per product that were cheap to acquire. And that's why all those businesses are thriving and doing great, even at a large scale. So she kind of breaks this down. This is the formula really for SaaS that's played out over the last 10 plus years. All of this is hard, of course. But the hardest part, I found, is actually in these 6 words: build enterprise-grade platform and ecosystem. Within those 6 words is years of complicated engineering and a lot of pain and suffering for companies. There's a book called Crossing the Chasm, written by Jeffrey Moore, you might have heard of. It's sort of a very famous sort of like business school book. They make you read it if you go get an MBA. And in that book, he breaks down technology adoption cycles into these 5 different stages. You have the innovators, the early techies adopting stuff. Then the early adopters start using the product. Then the early majority, the pragmatists. Late majority, where people are conservative. And then finally, you win over the laggards, the skeptics. And you can really map each product onto where in the adoption curve it is here. Today, something like AI tools, ChatGPT, is maybe in that, I don't know, I guess early majority. It's getting quite a bit of traction. Something that's like much, much more brand new starts off in that techies category, maybe people that are like buying the latest gadget or knowing about the latest tools. And then finally, the laggards, the skeptics, that might be something like microwave ovens today. But they all started in that early stage. All technology, when it gets released, is adopted by those innovators, people willing to try stuff. In this book, Moore talks about the break that happens between the early adopters and the early majority. And he calls this the chasm. And there are countless products that have not actually made this transition. You can think about them as things that like techies really like. Maybe they're dead startups, whether it's something like, if you remember the QCat or like Juicero or these companies, many of them don't actually break through these early adopter phases to get mass market appeal. However, every one of those successful products I had on the previous slide have done this. I believe there's something called the enterprise chasm that also exists in these SaaS companies. And crossing it efficiently and effectively, ideally as quickly as you can, is key to winning over your customers in the whole wider market. If you're able to do this, you can bridge from those early adopters, those individuals maybe using it, to companies, larger organizations, and really the larger contracts and revenue that'll power the company. Also, if you don't do this, what I can argue is that your business actually might fail. It might fail to grow, you might have to shut down the product, you'll run out of steam. And so it's actually a very important thing to take seriously. So that's what the enterprise chasm is. It's that transition from the early adopters to the majority that we need products to go through to be successful. So why should you cross it? Well, I kind of maybe scared you saying you have to cross it. Let me talk about some of the benefits of doing this. The first is when you go sell to enterprise, when you go out market, it increases your product's defensibility. If you've heard about like business moats, things that are like defensible for your market, enterprise is a great way to do that. It also has decreased customer churn. Enterprise customers have better revenue. They have better revenue retention, they're stickier. They also have a predictable sales motion to acquire them. So just from a business perspective, it's better. It also expands your market size. So you can actually sell to bigger and bigger organizations and keep growing. If you only sell to SMBs, small, medium businesses, you can run out of steam. Moving up market unlocks more customers with the same product. And lastly, when you accelerate your revenue growth and you grow, cash flow, if you're like a VC-funded business, and you can get cash flow positive, you can control your own destiny. You're no longer beholden to raising financing and needing to go through that whole experience. You can really, really continue to build your product and control your future. There's a ton of benefits around actually making this transition. I also mentioned that it's important to do it quickly because waiting is actually a big risk. So imagine you build your product and you slowly decide to go after enterprise, or you say, oh, I'm not going to do it, we'll wait until the last possible minute. But you've innovated in a new product category. What you're opening yourself up to is somebody cloning your features, catching up on capabilities, and then that company, that competitor, more quickly moving to the enterprise and winning those larger customers and contracts. And once those big customers adopt a product, it's very hard to get them out. Remember, it's really sticky with those big enterprise organizations. So once you have a new product in a category, it's actually very important to cross this quickly and go sell up market. You don't have to take my word for it. I'll give you a couple examples. You might remember Box versus Dropbox back in 2012-ish, 2010 to 2014. Dropbox didn't focus on enterprise. They were very much a consumer-focused product company, building photo sharing. They had an email app. Box was really focused on enterprise early on. In many cases, Dropbox's technology was significantly better than Box. But Box focused on the enterprise. They built the things that enterprise customers needed, and they still have a business today around that. Dropbox has caught up some, but those contracts are really hard to get. They're really entrenched. If Dropbox had focused on enterprise at that early phase, Box might not exist as a company today. They might have won the whole market instead of there being this bifurcation. Another example is Slack and Microsoft Teams. Slack, a company probably beloved by many of us, certainly I love it. Microsoft Teams was late to the party. I've never heard anyone say they love the product. missing features, missing developer ecosystem around it, and yet quickly eclipsed Slack in terms of number of users and also revenue. Some of that has to do, of course, with Microsoft's incredible distribution engine and their platform, but a lot of it was because Teams was enterprise ready right out of the gate. Financial services companies couldn't buy Slack because it was missing something like audit logging, whereas Teams had it on day one. So this let them come late to the party, but win over those customers. So it's really valuable to cross it, and you should do it quickly. That's what I'm getting at here. Okay, well, why doesn't everybody do this then? Seems obvious, perhaps. What makes it difficult to cross the enterprise chasm? Building all of this stuff for enterprise is extremely complex. And I would differentiate between something that's really complex and something that's hard, like kind of capital H hard, in the sense that complex things just have a lot of small moving parts and require a lot of painstaking engineering to get right. It's kind of like building a really intricate, wristwatch. The underpinnings of it, underneath, everything needs to work absolutely perfectly, otherwise the whole thing doesn't work. And this is, of course, expensive and complicated to build. Also, when you build for enterprise, there's a ton of these small details in a really large surface area that you have to integrate, and that gives you a large potential for bugs. And by bugs here, I mean like little haircuts, small sharp edges, things that really negatively impact the experience, but it's for your biggest customers that you have. And so chasing these can take a really, really long time. It can take years. Building this requires years of runway. And looking at companies that have moved through this, it takes at least a year really to get the first version of it out, to get started. Really, it takes like several years of continued investment. And so if you're thinking about doing this as a startup, make sure that you have financing to do it. Make sure you have runway. Don't go after enterprise unless you're ready to commit. It's definitely worth it in the end, but it's really hard to do. Going back to Slack, back in 2018, when I started thinking about this, I was interviewing people, and I talked to this product manager there. He said, I would guess we've spent $30 million building enterprise features. And we're probably only halfway done. Just to give you a scale of how much R&D goes into this. So it's expensive, it's hard to do. Maybe one of the most important things, which makes this hard, is engineers don't like building this. These enterprise features are not fun to code. You're often debugging legacy systems with old protocols, reading RFCs, working with black boxes that you have to test in production against, scratching your head with weird bugs. Trust me, I know. These features are not visible to users. They're only really these back-end integrations for IT admins. Hard to get engineers excited about that. In companies, if you build this stuff, you're not really set up for that glory or promotions. Typically, leadership cares about those shiny features versus that one edge case thing that needs to get built for a customer that's blocked. It's hard to celebrate these. And lastly, it's really hard to motivate teams. Engineers really want to build the core product features instead. They probably didn't join your company to go build enterprise stuff. They joined to work on core product features. And actually, there is one more here, in that it's not a single sprint. You need to keep investing in it. I mentioned that earlier, that it's several years of development. If this was just hard and you could do it over the course of a month, great. But it's this ongoing marathon of ongoing work and maintenance and improvement. Every single time you land another big enterprise customer, you're going to have to do additional work to plug it in, because it's this fragmented ecosystem of different vendors. So it's hard to get engineers motivated about this. It's also really hard to figure out what to build. I'll talk a little bit about some advice later on, like some tactical stuff, some way to prioritize. But if you just start working on this, if you're an engineering leader or a product leader or something at a company, it's really hard to figure out what to do. When you hear these things from customers, a customer that's blocked and say, oh, we'll buy your software only if you have feature X, it's really hard to tell which of those things is a one-off versus which is something that will actually be a compounding shared feature request, which one you'll be able to reuse. And you really don't want to build one-offs, right, when you're building a product. To figure this out, you have to go do this deep customer research with enterprise admins to gather requirements. So probably your product managers, your engineers don't even know the enterprise IT people to go ask questions, what they need. You also need to prioritize these based on your future customers, not just leads you have today, right? Because you want to be building for the customers you're going to close 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now. So you need to be able to kind of look into the future somehow. And maybe to sum this all up, your user is no longer the buyer. IT is now the buyer. IT is now the user. And so if you've had an organization where you think about being user-centric, building for end users, what experiences or features delight them, that's why they use the product, you still want to keep doing that, but now you have this totally other persona and audience you need to build for. So in addition to just motivating engineers to do this, say you can motivate them, now you got to figure out what to do. It's very challenging. So you might say like, okay, well, if I figure out what to build and I got my engineers motivated, we're going all in on enterprise. You also need to split your focus. Splitting focus is necessary. So what do I mean by this? Well, early on, your efforts are focused on building capabilities for the end user, right? Building for the person using your app, the nice product features that bring them in, why they share it, the collaboration tools, whatever. And that's why people adopt it. That's what people talk about when they love your product. If you switch and focus on enterprise, if you don't do that, like I said earlier, a competitor can come in and go build for enterprise, right? So this is the Slack versus Microsoft Teams example. Teams was the enterprise. But if you switch and go build for enterprise, and you neglect those early features, now someone else can start building for end users, and you have this competitive pressure on the other side. This might be what's happened with Slack today and something like Discord, which has gotten a lot more popular. And so you actually need to split your focus across this. You can't just move from one mode to the other. You need to build two streams of working and spread yourself between both building for end users and enterprise. And this is actually a major leadership challenge for engineering and product teams and organizations. How to advocate for and celebrate the development of those shiny new product capabilities, as well as the things that are helping close enterprise customers. I don't have a good solution to this, I'm sorry. Just pointing out it's hard. Okay. So now I've talked about what it is, why you should cross it, what makes it difficult. Let me talk a little bit about how to get started. So there's a ton of stuff to do when you go after enterprise. There's features you need to build for admins. You might want to change the positioning of your product in the market, the pricing of it. Enterprise is always more expensive because it's more valuable. Your packaging, you have different SKUs, different tiers. The sales team wants to have add-ons. You'll build a sales team. Maybe you don't really have a big sales team yet. You'll think about investing in things like security, compliance, and maybe even having new stakeholders that you're working with in your customers and internally. And you might sell through partnerships. There's a ton of, and this list goes on and on and on as you go at market. I'm going to talk a little bit about the admin features. So these are some categories which I have found are the most common places that people start. And if you're able to build in these, you can get pretty far. And since I'm talking to an audience of engineers, these are the things that you guys can go back and actually build with your teams for customers. So control, visibility, compliance, and automation. I'll go through all four. Control. IT admins want control. One of the main things they want to do is to connect your app to their enterprise identity service. So they might use something like Okta or Azure Active Directory or Ping Identity or Jump Cloud or ForgeRock or one of the zillions of different identity enterprise systems. They might have something they built in-house that manages their users, their employees. But at the end of the day, they want your app to be connected to their system through their identity provider. The most common thing people see here is single sign-on. You've heard of SSO, signing in through their identity system through a protocol like SAML. So no more username and password, no more Google sign-in. You go through the corporate identity system to control how people log in. They also might want something around user provisioning. This is sometimes also called user lifecycle management. the provisioning and deprovisioning of users automatically. You know, if you're Disney and you're buying a SaaS app, you're not going to log into the little admin console and add or remove people every Monday. You want to connect it to your Active Directory instance or whatever they use. So user lifecycle management. Not all users should have the same permissions. So you'll want custom roles and permissions. RBAC stands for role-based access control. Some people are admins, some people are members, some people have billing settings, tons of different custom permissions. And actually, as you go up to enterprise, every organization is different, which means that all of their permissions will be different, because the permissions sort of map to their org structure in their team. And lastly, you might want to add something like domain capture, where an enterprise can say, you know, we own Disney.com. So anytime a user signs up with Disney.com, it's managed by IT. So the way in your app you even think about managing users or modeling like organizations, hierarchy needs to evolve and change. This is really about control. Best place to start here is really this enterprise managed identity, stuff like SAML and SCIM. There's a lot of acronyms in this, I'm sorry. Okay, that's control. Visibility. Audit logs, very important. What's happening in the app? Pretty straightforward. They'll want to export that log data to their SIM, something like Datadog, LogDNA, Splunk. There's lots of different vendors out there. They might have things around legal holds or e-discovery. I know, pretty dry stuff. But very important, very, very important. If you've heard of DLP, data leak prevention, they might want to understand that users are not uploading data into your tool that breaks their security policy. And something like CASB, Cloud Application Security Brokers, is what it stands for, is very similar. They want visibility into how users are using the product to ensure that it meets their kind of security requirements as a company. And largely this is, again, integrating it with their security system. SIEM is Security Information Event Management. That's that category of kind of like security logging stuff that IT admins will have. If you've heard of like Panther or Splunk, some of your companies might use that. Those are different SIM vendors. Compliance, you've probably heard about this. GDPR, HIPAA, SOC 2, ISO, CCPA. Geographic data residency, running your application geographically in a region that customers want. Encryption, this is actually the major area, BYOK or EKM, bring your own key. Advanced threat protection, blocking anomalous behavior on people signing in, account takeover. These are typically things they need on the security side. And lastly, even deploying into their cloud, private cloud. But this is really fitting their data compliance needs. The hottest area of this to invest in is actually something called EKM, Enterprise Key Management. This is a whole talk about this. Slack actually built this into their product. They have a great blog post to go get customers like Apple and IBM. And it lets those customers like Apple and IBM manage the encryption keys that are used inside of Slack. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty cool stuff, but very complicated to build, of course. And lastly here, automation. What does automation mean? Well, if an enterprise is buying your tool, they don't just want to use it, they want to integrate it with their workflows, everything else they're doing as an organization. It can't just be an island, they have to plug it into everything else. And the way they do this is through an API. Every app should have an API. So you need to build an API for your service. You probably need to send webhooks as well, like event data, so they can hook off of that, process transactions, trigger different things in their workflows. There are platforms you might want to integrate with or need to. Integration platform as a service, that's the iPaaS. Zapier people use kind of on the consumer side, but there's Workato, Boomi, these are kind of enterprise Zapier things. Really to tie different services together and build automation. And for that API, they might want to run it through a secure gateway, something like Apigee, Kong. These are vendors that help build API integrations. But at the end of the day, even if you're not serving developers, you're selling to enterprise or mid-market or going up above, they'll want to be able to build some automation into it. They'll want an API. So 4 areas to get started. And if you do this, hopefully you can get started enough that you can begin to cross this enterprise chasm and move up market. Crossing the enterprise chasm can take a while. This is not an overnight thing to do, but it's really never too late to start. And I am sure that you'll be surprised if you start working on this, the response you can get from customers, and how much you can start to accelerate the business with the same product you already have. And hopefully, if you do it right, you will earn yourself a spot on this list. So you can do this. Like I mentioned, I've obsessed about this problem for a while. We can help. If you want to chat about this, come find me after this. You can DM me, send me an email. We're in the expo hall. Thanks so much.